Tonight's topic is School Costs, Taxes, and Quality in New York State, Part 2. And our host is Colonel Friel.
Welcome to the American Family Association Presents. Tonight our guests are Lori Pendelucas, I apologize, and Frank Russo. Lori has been a classroom teacher in both middle and high school systems in New York City for over 25 years. Also a supervisor for social studies in grades K through 12 in a Long Island suburban school district for 3 years. Finally, Lori taught and supervised prospective teachers on the college level for several years before retiring. Frank Russo is the president of the AFA of New York, serves on the board of directors of Morality in Media, the advisory board of United New Yorkers for Choice in Education, the executive committee of the Nassau County Conservative Party, and is president of the Port Washington Education Assembly. Frank has appeared on Phil Donahue, Geraldo, Larry King Live, and numerous other radio and TV talk shows. Welcome, Frank and Lori.
Thank you.
Tonight, we're going to talk about education quality. Frank, how should the cost of education be funded? With property taxes, income taxes, or some other way?
And I know there are proposals in the legislature to put a cap on property taxes, which I am inclined to favor. I don't think it's a panacea. I don't think it's going to necessarily solve problems because while it might put a limit on the property taxes, it probably could result in great state aid problems and where the state's going to get this money other than from increasing sales taxes or income taxes. Personally, I think some arrangement where you get money in part from income and part from property taxes is the best solution. I remember that was first pointed out to me by a superintendent of the Baldwin School District several decades ago, Dr. Fred Shore, who explained that certain people, especially the very wealthy people, know how to conceal a large part of their income. And so they're going to escape part of this income tax burden. Property or assets and buildings is very hard to conceal. So a diversity of sources of education dollars in the form of state aid, which comes basically from income taxes and sales taxes, and property taxes, which comes from taxes on visible property, that mixture probably is I think, the best. Now, the split, what the split should be, how much should come from income, how much should come from property taxes, that's arguable and debatable. Perhaps we should be getting more from this in the form of state aid and from income taxes and sales taxes than from property. That's a legitimate issue. But some people, like Harvey Levinson, want to go completely to an income tax. I don't think that's a proper thing. I think that will exacerbate the problem, in my judgment. The key point I guess I'd want to make is the problem is not where you're going to get the money so much. That's part of the problem. But the much bigger problem is why the spending is so high and so large. There's so much waste in my mind. We are just spending much more than we have to achieve a reasonable quality of education. We're being taken advantage of, I think, by certain unions and the fact that we have in effect, a government-run monopoly, and they're really taking advantage of the situation from the homeowners. Okay, so who's responsible, in your view, for the mess we find ourselves in? The Albany or the teachers' unions or legislators? Well, the teacher unions are just doing what comes natural. They're fighting for themselves. They can be greedy. They've sort of admitted that. We've heard stories, Al Shanker stories and other teacher union leader stories where they don't really care as much about the students as they care, but their job is to get as much money from the teachers for working as little as possible. That's their mission. Yes, then they're concerned about the students, as are, people in the supermarkets and so forth, but the teachers' union basic concern is the teachers and their compensation. So now, what was the question on? Well, who's responsible? Right. I'd put the blame in three parts. On Albany, the legislatures. 2, I'd put it on the boards of education. And sad to say, 3, I'd put it on us, the voters, because in a typical school budget, school board member vote, 20% might turn out. 4 out of 5 don't show up, possibly because they're working so hard, possibly because they don't even know where to vote, all sorts of reasons like this. But Albany controls the major part of our spending. A lot of people talk about state mandates on special ed students, and they're right. I don't get into that as much as I get into, for instance, the state mandating the pensions. Pensions are 100% paid by the taxpayers, not 100%. For 10 years, teachers, for example, pay 3% of their salary into the pension fund. But what we need to do for all government workers, including the teachers, including all the other unions, is go to a defined contribution system where they pay money into their retirement system, their retirement fund, their 401, 403, and the taxpayers will match it, just as private industry does. That would be a fair system, a 50-50 split. Right now, the taxpayers are paying about 95% of the pension costs, and the teachers are paying 5%. Totally unfair. Health insurance is another problem, although that's a problem caused by the school boards. The school boards negotiate the contracts. The contracts determine the salary levels, how many teachers they're going to have, what the class sizes are, and the school boards determine what the health benefits are. In most of Long Island, most suburban districts, taxpayers are paying anywhere from 80 to 90% of the health costs, which are in the order of $15,000 per teacher. So we'd like to get that to a 50-50 split, just like private industry. And what that would also do is it would encourage the teachers and other union members to look for more economically prudent health plans. If you have two plans and one plan costs twice the other, but you have a $5 copay, the one that costs twice as much, maybe you have a $15 or $20 copay, hey, that might be the more prudent thing to do. And if the teachers had to pay half the cost of the plan, they'd opt for the more prudent plan if they were paying half, but not if they're only paying 10% or 20%.
Are there even cases where teachers, say two teachers, a husband and wife, they both got health plans and they keep them because they both have them? Buyout options? Are there any circumstances where we're spending twice for the same?
They are, and sometimes school districts will even give an employee, a teacher, money to give up the health plan, and that's good. But better would be charge them 50%, and then you'll see the second one will voluntarily drop it,
right,
because they don't want it. Why should they pay when it's already covered by the other plan? So, but the pensions, the health insurance, the Board of Eds are probably, and the legislature probably equally share the blame. The Albany has the mandates that controls the pensions, controls tenure laws, controls the certain rules governing in the Taylor Law, the Triborough Amendment. The Board of Eds, though, determine the salary levels, the health benefits, the number of teachers, the class size. They're equally to blame, and as are the voters who don't show up to vote on May, or whatever, the third Tuesday in May is now the date for voting in school budgets. It's always the third Tuesday in May.
So you assign a third of the blame to each of the parties?
Each of the parties.
Lori, you have a comment on?
Well, I agree. I agree with what Frank said. You know, certainly the New York State United Teachers is the #1 contributor to Albany, and of course they pay back in kind. And I agree with him regarding the school boards. In the final analysis, it's the school board that signs a contract, and that's where the money goes. Unlimited sick leave, salary increases way above inflation, all kinds of benefits, health care, and they try and divert their blame by saying, well, it's the state that's giving us mandates. Yes, there are some mandates, but it is that school board that negotiates with the union and signs the contract, and that's what's costing us a lot of money.
And
so I concur with him.
And just to add, and as an example, the school districts, the administrations and the boards don't run the school district the way private industry is run. In Port Washington School District, we just had an experience where I tried to get the number of employees. Our school district, our administration, did not know the number of employees. They were giving me all sorts of different numbers, didn't know how to count full-time equivalent employees. They then misstate the numbers of employees that they've grown over the last 2 years by an enormous amount. I mean, the errors are not insignificant. So what that tells me is that the school districts don't really care that much about the spending. They're counting on the employees and the PTA organizations that just want to get the most spent because they think it's going to improve the quality of education, mistakenly believe that, but that's what they believe. So they call all the parents, they get them worried about what happens if the budget doesn't pass, and they're passing budget after budget that's going up 50% to 100% more than the rate of inflation every year, but now 30 years it's been like that, which causes our school taxes to be roughly double what they would have been had we increased the cost per pupil at the same level as inflation. It's out of control. The unions control our politicians, the school boards, and so many things are wrong with how the school districts are run. it would take a year and a day to go over all the problems. That's how bad the situation is.
And they get 2 bites at the apple. If the budget fails the first time, they get another vote at it.
Another issue with the school boards is that I've noticed that many of the people who sit on the school boards have children in the schools. I mean, there's almost a lack of representation of those people who don't have children in the school that are just called upon to pay the taxes. So if you have children in the schools, you're naturally going to want to spend more money, more programs. The other thing is this, the only people they hear from, until recently, have been those people demanding more and more and more. And so they get a skewed view of the situation. Of course, that's beginning to change now as we find ourselves in a situation of rising taxes and lower values for our houses. You know, people could always move out of Long Island. Now that's becoming more difficult to do. So the school boards really do take share the blame.
And Albany, just to add to the contingency budget problem, I mean, people they have no idea how the contingency budget is calculated, but the law, which was given us by Albany, not by the school boards, states that if you defeat the budget, the bulk of the budget can still go up by 120% of the rate of inflation. People don't understand that. 1.2 times the rate of inflation increase for the prior year is how much you can increase roughly 80 to 90% of the budget. The capital projects are not affected. So this is crazy. It should be not 120%, but maybe 20%, and make a reasonable adjustment for significant increases in enrollment, not 1% and 2% increases, which is the way it currently works, and then they fraudulently calculate the cost increases associated to these minimal student enrollment increases. So there's a lot of harm the way the legislation currently exists, and that's of course the fault of Albany. And our state senators, our state assemblymen, they're afraid to tackle the teacher unions.
Lori, what are the current salaries of our school employees, and are they fair?
Well, the current salaries. Teachers get irreversible salaries every year they work. There are 3 ways teachers earn more money. Number 1 is strictly seniority. Every district is different, but there are a series of steps, and along each step, a teacher will get 2, 3, 4% raise. The second way is collecting college credits. So if a 4th grade teacher comes in, she starts off in the 40s. By the time she's on step 4, she's probably making around 55. If during that year she gets a master's degree, she can get another 20, 25% in that 1 year. So they go up every year based on seniority and based on the number of college credits they get. It's not just a master's. They get an increase for 15 credits above a master's, 30 credits above a master's, a PhD in education, depending on the district. And then when there is a contract, all the steps go up. So you might have a contract that offers 3% a year. So in that year of the contract, that 4th grade teacher, if she has a master's, will get the automatic increase of, let's say, 4%, the master's degree of maybe 20%, and then the whole thing is raised another 3 or 4% because the contract has been signed.
Okay, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, I want to continue that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we reached the halfway of a point of our program. We're going to pause for a brief PSA, and we'll see you in a minute.
My hero hasn't traveled the world. Doesn't star on her own TV show. Can't sing very well. My hero didn't plan on being pregnant. Put her career on hold. Chose to have and love me. My hero, my mom.
If you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, learn more today about parenting or adoption. While there are unwanted pregnancies, there are no unwanted children.
My hero isn't able to slam dunk. Doesn't make $1 million a year. Can't rap at all. My hero helped my mom when she was pregnant. Takes care of us. Chose to have and love me. My hero, my dad.
If you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, learn more today about parenting or adoption. While there are unwanted pregnancies, there are no unwanted children.
caucus about quality education in New York, cost and quality. Lori, I interrupted you. You were talking about teachers' salaries and if they're fair or not.
Well, yes. So essentially what I was saying was that teachers get salary raises based on seniority, based on earning college credits, and based on new contracts. Are they fair? Well, all of these increases have nothing to do with merit. They are automatic, irrevocable salary increases, have absolutely nothing to do with merit. So therefore, the teacher who's working very, very hard is getting the same salary increases as the teacher who is not working hard. They have nothing to do with the number of resumes for each position. For example, you might have easily 200 resumes for an elementary school position. The market has no impact on this system. And they have nothing to do with need. In other words, you have elementary school positions, there are many, many applicants, and you have a chemistry teacher, you might have 10 applicants, they get the same. So the system really is not fair. And the system is very detrimental. It doesn't reward the math teacher, the chemistry teacher. Everybody is the same. Everybody is the same. And whether they do a good job or a poor job or a mediocre job, it's all the same. Such a system does not lead to excellence. Such a system drags down the educational process.
Sounds like the old Soviet Union. A true monopoly, Frank?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Lori, and it's wonderful to see a teacher. By the way, just for the record, I like to get this out of
family members who are
right. I've got a stack of them. My mother was a public school teacher in New York City. My wife taught in the public schools. She just taught a few years before we started our family. I have a daughter and two daughters-in-law, all teachers, so I love teachers. They are the most wonderful people. Every one of them are saintly people devoted to children and whatnot, and that's probably an attribute that you find in teachers. They have a certain, that's what probably geared them in that direction. So I know the teachers want to string me up very often, and they're taking fun. They're raising money to help me move down to Virginia. They're doing all sorts of wonderful things. But they are wonderful people,
they bought
teachers.
Your house.
They won't pay my property taxes, but they're really wonderful people. So I want to get that said. I mean, and what their union people are doing for them is just natural. I mean, I don't want to even call it greedy. Their job is to get as much money as they can for as little work as possible. That's what the unions are doing. They weren't unions 60 years. They only became unions, I think, in the 1960s, as I recall. And before then, their salaries were, to be honest, I think, unfairly low. But then they've grown quite rapidly, and now they're well above what I think is a fair value. Now, a bunch of points I wanted to comment on. Lori, I completely agree with her. She talked about how the teacher's salary is increased by virtue of time. Every year you live, you get more money. It's another step. And you also get money for extra credits. Now, we did a little study back about 10 years ago in the Port Washington School District, and we found, you know what the two most popular courses the teachers took for this extra credit were? In fact, it may have been the top 3 courses. Self-Esteem 1, Self-Esteem 2, and I think the third one may have been Self-Esteem 3, but I'm not positive. I'm serious. These were the two most popular courses they were taking in some correspondence course, I think, with some university that gave them credits. Taking the self-esteem, for Pete's sake, give me a break. And that was what we found. There were others. One literally was, we used to joke, we didn't know it was true. I think it was pottery making. They were getting credits in pottery making. Now this is an abuse. And I fault the administration of a school district. Many, just as we know now, they've been giving lawyers all sorts of opportunities to get pensions they weren't entitled to in the school districts throughout the state. It's a major problem in New York State. Some 80 or 100 lawyers have done this, and they're getting pensions they're not entitled to. So also school boards and school districts are very lackadaisical about this. They don't care about the spending, and I see that. They're, again, board members too, wonderfully generous people, kind of like, get to see them, most of them, and not all of them, but 90%, 80% of them are very kind, generous people. Some are in it for selfish reasons. Maybe they have a child that's special needs and they want to get this child special things. But most board members are very generous-minded people, but they are absolutely out of it in terms of monitoring the numbers that they are really committed to monitoring by virtue of running for school board. And the voters and the taxpayers are paying the penalty. The average increase for teachers in our school district, and I think most school districts, when you combine the step increase, that's living another year, plus the with the cost of living increase that the contracts give them, The average teacher gets 7% per year. That's almost that's 2.5 times inflation this year. Now, not all teachers get it. Only about 70%, 75% get that. But the other 25% or 30% who don't, they're at these high steps where the average salary is about $105,000, $110,000. A lot of people don't realize this. Salaries now go up to $120,000. But the salaries of those that don't get these 7% annual increases and only get maybe, they still get an increase, they get maybe 3.5%, but not 7. But they're already making typically over $100,000. Most teachers are getting 7% increases in my school district. And that's not even counting that extra credits, the plus 15 credits or 30 credits. That even adds to it more. A couple of other points. The average salary, Lori mentioned $80,000. That's probably it for Long Island. My school district, Port Washington, the average pay is $90,000. The benefits cost typically $30,000 for this teacher. So the total cost of an average teacher in Port Washington School District is $120,000. That's for working, as Lori said, 185 days. However, we also took a look at absence. In the Port Washington School District for the most recent year, 15 days the teachers were absent, 13 of which they were paid, 12 sick leave and that kind of thing, but 12 to 13 of the 15 they're paid. So they're really working 170 days a year or 34 weeks a year. You work that out, the salary out, and it comes to something like $3,500 per week. It's an incredible number. It's an incredible cost. And we've got to start dealing with it. Now, do we have to pay these salaries? That's the real question. Do we have to pay $90,000? Starting salary in Port Washington, you come in on Master's Step 1 and it's $55,000. Do we have to pay that? The next question is, well, how many people are there available for the job? In New York City, you do have to pay this to get qualified teachers. In New York City, they're not overpaid. But in Long Island, and it's been like this since the late 60s. For 40 years, it's been like this. I've checked it 6 times about every 6 or 7 years. We have between 100 and 200 applicants per open position. It's been like that always. Last time I checked in Port Washington, around 2003 or 2004, somewhere around that, we had 4,800 applicants for about 26 or 27 jobs. Now, we don't have them, as Lori says, for the chemistry jobs, the physics, the math. There, and as she says, and I completely agree with Lori, those teachers should be paid more. To attract quality people, you've got to pay more. But for 95% of the positions, we have about 125 applicants. Even if 60% of them are not qualified, you still have 40 or whatever that are qualified applicants dying for the job. And unfortunately, what I'm finding increasingly, it's not the best person being hired. More often than not, more than 50% of the time, it's who's got the connections. And it's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. It doesn't benefit the kids, and the taxpayers are paying the cost of this. So it's a serious, serious problem. One final point. This I think is Albany, but I'm not sure. Could be the local boards. But in our district, and I believe it might be statewide, school employees can work for 5 years. They can start at age 50, retire at age 55, and get health benefits paid for life. When I heard this, I didn't believe it. I asked my superintendent, Dr. Gordon. He said, no, couldn't be true, Frank. Went and checked it, saw me at the next board meeting. Frank, it is true. They can retire at age 55 after working 5 years and get health benefits, 80 to 90% of which is paid by the taxpayers, paid for life. This is the absurdity that Albany and our school boards have gotten us to.
That's incredible. That's a remarkable statistic. I wonder how many people know that. Lori, what can be done to ease the burden on the taxpayer?
Well, certainly we have to speak to our legislators in Albany. I mean, they have passed, as I said before, a series of pieces of legislation that have been designed to decrease turnout and essentially get people off Long Island. You know, 1 out of 4 of our young people is leaving. Seniors are leaving in droves. Some of the things that can be done is we should be having an election in November when people come out. One budget, one vote. If the budget goes down, it goes down. The Wicks law, I'm sure you'll speak about
and
that.
If it's voted down, then something tied to the inflation rate would be the increase in the budget. If it's voted down, there'd be something put into the law that would tie the budget to the inflation rate.
That's one possibility. If it's voted down, it should revert to the last year's budget, maybe with some kind of inflationary adjustment. All of these things can be done. The contingency budget should come in line. I mean, it should, as Frank has said, that the contingency budget should be more realistic. Right now, it seems to be padded. But finally, I really believe that the way to help the taxpayer and to revive the island is to put a cap on the tax levy, on the school tax levy. I mean, you have to stop the spending. We should not be fooled when they tell us they're going to give us an income tax or they're going to give us a circuit breaker. This is just shifting the funding. Sooner or later, we're going to pay. What we have to do is we have to get a cap. Massachusetts has a cap of 2.5%. California has a cap. Even New Jersey has a cap. We seem to be one of the few states that doesn't have a cap on spending. And I mean, that's where the problem is, too much spending.
Frank, 1.5 minutes.
I agree. It should be a spending cap as the ideal way. If they put a tax cap, then I'd say we need associated with that a cap on state aid. How much of an increase you can't burden the people in other counties to pay for our schools. So a tax cap coupled with a state aid cap or a spending cap would be the ideal way to do it, a spending cap. As Laurie says, we should have just one budget vote. We should be voting for board members clearly in November to get a better reflection of the community's thinking on the school budget. Right now, 20%, 25% people, that means 15% determine who's the school board member. It's terrible. You're having the views of the unions and of these wild spenders in certain parent groups who don't understand the real relation between spending and quality. And it's very poor, that relationship. There's not a good relationship, but they, in their own minds, they think there is. In our school district and many school districts, the top 10%, 15% get treated royally. The bottom 15%, the special needs kids get, that's we're spending twice as much, $40,000 and $50,000 per pupil. But the middle 70%, 75% are really getting hurt badly. Their test results are not what people think they are. They're not doing that well, and they're the victims of this calamity that we have where we're spending galore and we're not giving good quality education to the middle 70% of our students.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our guests tonight, Frank Russo and Laurie Pendelucas, for a very informative discussion. Join us again next week for the American Family Association Presents. Thank you and have a good evening.
When I found out I was pregnant, I thought I would lose my job.
My boyfriend told me to choose between him and the baby.
I worried about staying in school.
I was already struggling to care for one child.
My parents told me I wasn't ready to be a mom, so I had an abortion. I had physical problems afterwards.
I went from relationship to relationship.
I hated myself.
I started to have nightmares.
I cried when I saw a pregnant woman. I tried to commit suicide.
Couldn't bond with the child I later had.
I tried to numb my pain with alcohol.
I struggled with depression.
I had trouble conceiving again.
You see, abortion didn't solve our problems.
It just created different ones.
Each of us thought we were the only ones struggling afterward.
Now we realize many women regret their choice.
That's why we are silent no more.
We found help and healing, and you can too. Call or go online today.
When the pressures of the day are over and the last obligation has been met, there comes a time to celebrate the greatest gifts of all. To rediscover the joy of your children, call 1-800-A-FAMILY at Focus on the Family.
This program was brought to you by the American Family Association of New York. For information or comments, you may contact Long Islanders for Educational Reform, www.lischooltax.com, and the AFA of New York, P.O. Box 203, Port Washington, New York, 11050, telephone 516-944-3544, website www.afany.org. Your comments are welcome, and thanks for being with us.